Morning, everyone. Welcome to today's candidate forum. My name is Mendy McAdams. I am the Executive Director of the Fairfield Area Chamber of Commerce, and I'm honored to serve as your moderator this morning. This forum provides an excellent opportunity to hear directly from our legislators about their priorities and plans for the future. First, we would like to express our gratitude to our sponsors for allowing this event to be open to the public and at no cost. The Fairfield Arts and Convention Center, Morrissey Law, Sierra Club, and Jefferson County Farms and Neighbors, or otherwise known as JFAN. Your support in making this a free and open to the public helps our commitment to fostering civic engagement is very greatly appreciated. We would also like to send a big thank you up to Jason and the Fairfield Media Center for always being there to live stream or record when the internet is being silly. You truly are an asset to Fairfield. We'll begin this morning with a legislative update from our three legislators, Senator Adrian Dickey, Representative Jeff Shipley, and Helena Hayes. Please note that Senator Dickey has to leave promptly at 9 a.m. to catch a flight and will not be able to stay to network today. We appreciate him taking his time with us this morning, and we wish him safe travels. Following the legislative updates, we will open the floor to audience questions. If you'd like to ask a question, please head to the microphone at the back of the room to ensure fairness and efficiency as we ask our questions. We'd like to remind you to please only ask one question and to keep it brief. As we always seem to say, save the story and just ask the question. Remember to ask the question in a positive or neutral way, not to be attacking. Follow-up questions will not be tolerated. After asking your question, please return to the back of the line if you would like to ask a follow-up or second question. Keep all your questions respectful and relevant to the topics being discussed. Today's topics are taxes and education. After the Q&A, there will be about 30 minutes of networking. We kindly ask you to remember that the convention center is open just for this event, and we would like the staff to be able to go about their day. So we'll ask that 30 minutes be the limit to the networking. Thank you for joining us this morning and your commitment to staying informed. Let's get started with our legislative updates. Senator Dickey, would you like to begin?
Good morning. Thank you, everybody, for being here. I guess most of you are like me. Woke up this morning and it was quite brisk, or a lot more brisk than yesterday. Yesterday was spoiled a little bit. But nice to be with you this morning. Adrian Dickey, fortunately, was reelected this last fall to my third term in the Iowa Senate. It seemed like this will be my fifth year up there. In the Senate, fortunately, we're supposed to have 4-year terms, but because of the special election I came in on initially and then redistricting process, it's hard to believe that I'm now on my third term. I'm almost more of an elder in the Senate now, which is really shocking because Jeff served longer than either Helena and I combined. So it's nice to be with you. We had our first week this week. The first week of session's more pageantry than anything. You hear a lot of speeches, a lot of talking, a lot of bills get dumped for the initial week. So you're wading through those and looking through some of them. So the first week's, it's a lot of stuff, not a lot of substance, I guess, as far as accomplishing or getting anything done. So not a lot to talk about as far from a legislation standpoint that's taken place so far. So a lot of this is going to be questions that you have on those topics and what our thoughts might be as the session moves forward. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. Representative Jeff Shipley, serving Fairfield, Mount Pleasant, and Van Buren County. This is my 7th legislative session. This year, I'm on the Education Committee, the Higher Education Committee, Government Oversight, which also deals with education issues, funnily enough, and then Judiciary Committee. So those are my assignments, and we do have quite the workload. Just to kick it off, I think a couple of the topics I've been honing in on this first week. One of the big themes from the governor's address was just the responsible use of technology, particularly in the classroom, whether it's a high school student maybe paying more attention to their phone than the classroom instruction, or someone who's operating a motor vehicle and is inappropriately using their phone at that time. There's no shortage of tragedies where devices and mobile phones have been responsible for a fatality. So I know over in Mount Pleasant, they're very up in arms wanting to improve the hands-free driving law. Yesterday, I had the pleasure of meeting with two paraeducators, one in Washington School District, one in Fairfield, and we talked for about 2.5 hours. It was a very lengthy discussion, covered a lot of things, but really just trying to get a handle on the behavioral health situation in the schools and kind of how we need to improve our strategy or strategies for addressing that, and just making sure that we are creating educational environments that are appropriate and supportive of every student. So there are a lot of concerns in that. Real quick, one kind of piece of policy, the state of Iowa has had a therapeutic classroom grant program for the last 5 years, and you've seen a lot of school districts, they call it different things, but basically it's the same idea that there's a dedicated room where a student can go to disengage or calm down or relax if they're having a temper tantrum or an emotional outburst. And there's just a lot of interesting feedback on kind of the efficacy or the purpose of these facilities. But I know just one kind of out-of-the-box thing we've been hearing about over in the Ottumwa has a brain health room. I don't know if brain health is the most appropriate terminology or not, but I was happy to hear one thing they're experimenting with is better lighting, natural lighting, full spectrum LEDs versus just your typical fluorescent lighting. So I think that's kind of where we're at, where we're really looking for new innovative strategies, things that could be very consequential to a student, but may have been neglected by some of the more mainline establishment consultants. So I think we really are at that point where we need to be really digging deep and thinking outside new strategies, new approaches, and really putting as much on the table as we can, which leads to the next subject of school nutrition. So the FDA this week banned red dye number 3. Big feedback I got is, well, why didn't this happen 10 years ago? And what about all the other additives that potentially cause harm? And talking to school nutrition people, even if the state were to try to enforce a ban on some of these things, they can't even get from their suppliers, food that doesn't contain perhaps some of these harmful contaminants or additives. So it's a bit of a tricky situation, but I think the public definitely has an appetite to really improve our diet and have more nutritional strategies there. So yeah, very thankful to be here. And again, thank you for Mendy and the Chamber for having us. And thank you all for being here this morning. It's a great turnout. So looking forward to a great conversation.
Yes, thank you everybody for attending this morning. Early morning, cold morning. We appreciate it very much. My name is Helena Hayes, and I represent the House District 88, which is all of Keokuk County, most of Mahaska, and just a little bit here in Jefferson County, the northern rural counties. And I'm from New Sharon. I am serving my second term in the Iowa House, so this is my 3rd year. And I have been put on all new committees this round, which is very exciting. I'm very happy to be on Veterans Affairs. I hold that very near and dear to my heart. My father's a Vietnam vet, and right now I'm advocating for him as he's going through some health issues as we navigate the Veterans Affairs, health system and things like that. So I'm also on education for the first time. Again, we expect that committee to be very busy, be full of many, many bills that are introduced, many committees, meetings, and just lots of long conversations there. And I'm also on workforce and development, which took me completely by surprise. I didn't request that one. And I don't have a business background. I've been blessed to be a stay-at-home mom for the last 25 years. I've got to homeschool my 3 children. They are now all adults and doing very, very well in this new adventure in my life. I bring forward real life experience of everyday people, what it's like to live on one income, what it's like to raise children and educate them yourself, the real basic experiences that we have in our communities. And so I am also on another committee, and this is one that I was on previously, and that is international relations. And that's really unique because we get to be the greeting party of international diplomats that come visit our state and come to the Capitol, and I really appreciate that. We had our first meeting yesterday. We are sister states to Kosovo, and so we talked a lot about some of the history in that and some of the things that we've done with them. So happy to be here. I do want to just point out, I really appreciate all the work that goes into planning these, and they're really important to have. However, there's always this time constraint, right? You rent this building for a certain amount of time, you pay for it, you get to ask one question, there are limitations to what you can do, but I just want to remind everybody that real dialogue, it doesn't actually happen in these very confined spaces. Real dialogue between all of us and you is going to happen over the phone, it's going to happen over coffee, it's going to happen over dinner, it's going to happen face to face and a lot of other circumstances. So I just encourage you to keep that in mind. So many of the things that you're going to bring up are, they're not simple solutions. And as we all ask questions and seek answers, it's going to take a lot of time. You said hours. You were 2.5 hours with one topic yesterday. That's really what it's going to take. So I just appreciate you being here for this event, but keep that in mind that we all encourage you to keep that dialogue going with us coming up this session. So we are ready for our first questions. Thank you.
Adrian, do you want to report about which committees you're on?
Thank you. I apologize for not mentioning that. So this will be the 4th year I'm the chairman of the Workforce Committee in the Senate. I'm also on the Commerce, Judiciary, Transportation, Rules Administration, Economic Development, and Ways and Means. So, and the reason why we tell you what committees we're on is, all issues we're interested in, right? But for example, I'm not on any of the HHS committees or Education Committee, and so often somebody may come up to the Capitol or call or email, whatever, on a certain bill. And let's say it's on an education bill, because that's one of the topics today. And it's not that I don't have an interest in those bills, but at any given day, there's probably 500 or 1,000 bills floating around up there, and it's pretty hard to keep on top of the ones on the committees you're involved with, much less committees you're not. So, and the majority of those bills, which is a good thing, through the process, may not see the floor. They may not see debate. So often somebody reaches out to me, let's say on an education bill, I may not even know what it is, because I'm not going to look at it for the most part in depth until I see it's something that might actually hit the floor and something we will debate. And there's a process, it's got to go through a subcommittee and the committee, and there's different steps for it to go to get to where I may even see it. So that's why we tell you kind of what committees we're on, because it does really affect our knowledge on some of the topics, because you just don't have enough time to fully be abreast of everything.
Good morning. Thank you, legislators, for being here and being available. My name is Margaret DeWire. Over the last couple of years, so my question is about taxation and education. That's our topic today, right? So over the last couple of years, the legislature has cut taxes, which theoretically seems like a good idea, put more money in the pockets of Iowans, and recently has also limited what taxing entities can do. Also theoretically seems like a good idea for Iowans. I'm curious as to how the legislature suggests that entities, the communities, towns, cities, can support themselves with limitations on taxation. I know the city of Des Moines has a $17 million deficit. I'm sure many other communities are hurting. And it doesn't seem like anyone's taking into account the fact that if we cut income, sooner or later we're going to have to cut services. And that has me concerned. I know the overall idea is to make Iowa a more attractive place for people to move to, but our communities are not becoming more attractive places to move to because they're on life support. So give me some thoughts as to how you think communities can support themselves. I know one idea is to have a municipal utility, but the IUB isn't supportive of that idea. So just give me some thoughts, please. Thank you.
Well, some of the funding that we're seeing right now, I will speak for myself. but I'm pretty sure I'm speaking on behalf of Jeff and Helene as well. Without a doubt, number one issue, receive emails, phone calls, comments on is property taxes. I'd say 90% of the conversations I have are on property taxes. We are elected to do what we're asked to do, and if that's the overwhelming issue is cutting property taxes, I'm going to probably listen, and we're going to cut property taxes. I feel like I've always been very fair to the counties, the cities, whatever entity that is. When someone brings that up, that could result in different services. That doesn't always mean worse. You know, I mean, when most of us that have jobs or people that have businesses, you understand sometimes you cut budgets. That doesn't mean what you provide as a company or as a service you provide is worse. Sometimes it just means you got to cut your budget because you don't have the money there. Same way with our houses. You may want to buy something, but you don't have the money to do it, so you can't do it this time. You might buy, beans and rice instead of cheeseburgers that night for dinner, okay? That's what this is about. And so many of our public entities, taxing authorities in the last several years when valuations went sky high, they spent a lot of money, a lot more money than they had in the past. And people are saying, we don't want that. So I'm all for lower taxes. And I think lower taxes is better. I'd rather give you the money than me spending it. I don't want to spend your money. You should spend it. You have a whole lot better insight as to how you're going to spend your money than what I can spend it for you. So I am for cutting taxes in everywhere I can.
So I think, thank you, Mark, for the question. I think basically the question boils down is how can we make sure our local governments are providing the services that people need? I think the big thing we've seen in this community or in this area have been, the local EMS, making sure that if you pick up the phone and you have an emergency, that an ambulance is going to show up. And a few years ago in certain parts of the state, that wasn't happening. So, the legislature fixed that and said, okay, EMS is a essential service and you can levy specifically for that. I don't know if you watched the Iowa Press program, but a few weeks ago they had a county supervisor on there, and they said that that they were prompted by House File 718 to really take a serious look at their budget, and they cut things that they probably should have cut 10 years ago. But the problem is no one had forced that conversation to the table yet. So the legislature has a huge responsibility because all taxing authority does derive from Iowa code. And don't underestimate, especially people on fixed income, just how impactful a rise in property tax or a rise in home insurance, especially if you're on a mortgage and all of a sudden, your rates are changing. So yeah, people are being hurt by this, especially in an older community like ours where a lot of people are retired on fixed income. If your property taxes go up, that could really throw a wrench in your budget. So I think certainly, we have to look at it from the position of the local governments, but we really have to put ourselves in the feet of the taxpayer and say, how is this affecting you in your life? And that's ultimately who we serve. So I think that's the decision the legislature is making. And then again, just how can we provide services more efficiently? That goes back to just how many layers of bureaucracy we have and how many, we're blessed with 99 counties because that establishes a lot of local control where we can have a real loud voice at the courthouse. But also are there services that are being duplicated? Are there services that are no longer relevant? I think there is an important conversation about things in Iowa code that might have been mandated and expenses that were forced on local governments that maybe aren't appropriate anymore. So I think there are very, very important conversations. And I think this is just an area we haven't had enough discussion on. And I know at least for what I've seen, every county is going to be a little bit different. Van Buren County, they're really scraping the bottom of the barrel there. They thought they were going to have to approach the taxpayers for a referendum. Looks like they'll be able to skate by with their ending balance this year. But yeah, they're running a pretty bare bones operation. And so it's a very important ongoing discussion, and I think it is incumbent on we the people to make it really clear what are the services we want and what are the things that we don't need. Now, since you mentioned the city of Des Moines, I'll just bring this up because I think this is something the Judiciary Committee is going to take a look at. We have an Iowa Civil Rights Commission. Iowa Code also says cities above 29,000 also have to have their own kind of human rights council. But when you look at a city like Des Moines, they're investigating these complaints and they'll get overturned by the district court anyway. So you have a local government entity that is exercising a lot of power, but they're really doing it in a very incompetent way that's costing a lot of time and money on the other end. So again, we just need to make sure everyone's on the same page and we're all working towards the same goal, in that we're getting what we're paying for. But at the end of the day, Iowa needs to be an affordable place to live, and taxes are going to be a big part of that.
Yeah, so Division 10 of last year's tax reform bill had a little part in it in which we required counties to send out a landowner information paper. And it had to include certain information, and you all would have got it. Every single person who owns property in Iowa would have got it. And the intent behind that was so that we could encourage people to get involved in their local politics and how their local and city government, county and city government, were spending their property taxes, since property taxes are all going to local funds, right? Those levies. And I personally received a lot of pushback from that letter. It cost counties money. But I noted that the letter really didn't really result in a lot of confusion. A lot of fear, because people didn't understand what it was. And it's probably not a good idea to do it that way again. I would like to have conversations with our members that the intent to try to get more people involved in local government needs to probably go about another way. But my point is that everybody saw that very, very few people pay attention to their county and city budgets, very few. And if you're in local government, you know that also. How many people have showed up at a budget hearing? How many people reached out to you and even asked, how much are we spending on this or that? Or, you all have to manage your own personal finances. And elected officials are tasked with managing your tax dollars. And so we sort of just leave that without just assuming that they're taking care of all of that just fine. I'm finding in my county, Mahaska County, that they're already looking at ways to be more efficient in combining positions and saving the county that hasn't really hurt them, that people haven't really noticed. And they're willing to take that hard look at it. So I just want to encourage people to not let fear lead you in this, that just because we need to take a hard look at property taxes and why everybody's complaining about them and it's hurting them, does not mean that we don't believe in local control and the ability for local governments to be able to sustain themselves. They do have to do that. But people also know that they feel that they never own their home. Even when they're retired on fixed incomes, they have to be able to pay those taxes if they expect to still keep that piece of property. So it's a very real concern. It is the #1 issue in the Iowa House. Would you say it is, Adrian?
Absolutely.
Okay. Our leadership and our caucus is united in this, that this is definitely a top priority, which is kind of interesting, guys, because this tax is not at all why I got into politics and stepped into it. But clearly, it's the real life issue, and it absolutely matters. So I look forward to hearing all of the ideas. Everybody's just bringing ideas to the table. I've asked people in local government to give me ideas. Where do you see? Take an honest look at your budget and what can we do? We also have to be careful. I think at the State House, there's also times, we're going to see some of that coming in this session, that people want to add additional authority for levies, want to put on more levies and for more services to you. And as we're trying to cut taxes, how are we supposed to give authority for more levies when the two just work to cancel each other out? So, yeah, that's a really, really good question, ma'am. And it's going to take a lot of work as we figure out it's going to take a lot of coordinated work. So
And just one more quick point to put a bow on it. I don't think any of us are under any illusion this is an easy problem to solve. So I think you will see multiple proposals. I'm sure the Senate will have a proposal. The House, we're being told, will likely have at least a couple of proposals. And that's designed to just force as many people to the table as possible. So this is going to be an ongoing discussion that'll probably last through the end of April. And we need your help to figure out what we're going to do.
There's a reason why it's the last big tax bill that we've tackled. I mean, in my 5 years, we've lowered income tax, I think 3 times. We've lowered corporate income tax twice. We've tackled a lot of the taxes. When it comes to property tax, it's complicated. There's over 2,000 different taxing entities in the state of Iowa between schools, cities, counties, different taxing authorities. So it's very complicated. And try to do something that has some beneficial results is one thing. Trying to do it that gives a little bit of flexibility, because Jefferson County is different than city of Fairfield, which is different from Van Buren County, which is different from Henry County. Trying to allow that flexibility to be in place while still accomplishing something is what makes it very difficult. When we passed, what was it, 718, the property tax bill 2 years ago. So I sit on Ways and Means Committee in the Senate, and that's all taxing issues go through Ways and Means. That bill was always intended to be a 2-part bill. Okay, that was part 1. Part 2 was intended to be last year. We had so many meetings, so many sessions, inviting different groups throughout the state, counties, cities, et cetera, to come talk to us about that bill. That bill was dropped, I think, the 3rd week of January, and we didn't do much with it on the floor or even in subcommittees for like 3 months. We had all kinds of time for public input on that to say, this is what we're looking at, but tell us how it can be better. We beg counties and cities to come talk to us on how this could be better. And what we got was very, very, very frustrating. All we got was, don't leave it, don't touch it, just leave it as it is. We don't want change. Well, I'm sorry, we're going to have change. I mean, we're hearing from 90% of our communications with people is about our property taxes are too high. We're going to do something about property taxes. This was the first proposal. Tell how this does and doesn't work for your county or city, whatever it is. And we got very little input. So that was frustrating. Understand some of the concerns. Jeff brought up Van Buren. Van Buren County is a little different than some of the other counties I represent with their budgets, and they've been pretty lean, in my opinion. How that affected them differently than maybe, say, a Dallas County who had crazy amount of growth and really need to be reined in on their property taxes. So we passed that bill 2 years ago with the intentions of it being part 1 of part 2. We didn't get a lot of input, so we held off on part 2 last year to try to get more input from the other, the local government to how we can make part 2 better. So please reach out to us with those ideas.
While we're on the topic of property taxes, et cetera, by the way, I'm Connie Boyer, Mayor of Fairfield, and our city attorney brought up that there was an article in the Des Moines Register last weekend about changes possibly in TIF, and I'm wondering if any of you know about that and what the talk is and what really give us more detail on that.
I heard a lot of echo, but I think you said, excuse me, changes in the TIF structure.
Yes, apparently there was an article in the Des Moines Register last weekend. I didn't see it, but I would like, if you have more information, to explain it a little bit.
And I apologize. I've been fighting this cough, so I started coughing on it. I apologize ahead of time. I read some of that article. If it's the article I'm thinking of, it talked about, it was where a lot of these data centers starting 10, 15 years ago came into Iowa, and they came in on 2 things, cheap energy and TIF. Ankeny, Des Moines metro area, Council Bluffs were big to act on this, providing a lot of tax incentives to these billion-dollar projects with the idea that they're going to bring a lot of property tax down the road, jobs, et cetera. Well, the jobs really didn't happen. The jobs in creating the data centers happened, but when they're built, they were pretty self-sustained, so they weren't a big job creator. So there's some question is if that TIF has really been good for that community or not. And should we reevaluate how TIF is being used in the state? I believe that's kind of what the article or what you're asking about. I've not heard a lot of that internally in the Senate, talking about changing TIF. I kind of thought after what you brought this up, I thought that article, reading that last week, that there had been some discussion about it the first week of session, and I just was surprised I have not heard much about it.
I don't really have anything to add, but my understanding is, just to define it for everyone watching at home, tax increment financing, that's what we talk about. We talk about TIF as a public financing method, basically used to incentivize a redevelopment or infrastructure. Basically, a municipality will divert future property tax revenues from a defined area or district towards a particular project or economic development. So I think the only, like I know Henry County had a TIF recently, and I think usually it's just kind of disagreement on, is this a good project worthy of TIF or not, is usually the kind of things we hear about. But I'm not aware of any proposal at this time.
Yes, in Mahaska County, a lot of our TIF comes from our windmills. We have windmills in the northern part around the New Sharon area. And my predecessor, Representative Dustin Haidt, I believe he was working on some changes even 3 or 4 years ago that I remember hearing about. So I don't know that it's necessarily new that they've been examining that. What I would recommend, again, this is another little area. There's never a shortage of a demand to learn, right? There's so much you guys can learn. So if you go to the Iowa Legislature website, under publications, there's a place where you can get legislative guides, and one of them is specific to tax increment financing, and one is specific to property taxes. And basically you can print it off, and here you have all the information and understanding how it works, some of the history. They put a lot of work into these, and they actually develop these guides for legislators coming in. Because you got to remember, House members, we have to run every 2 years. I had several of my colleagues. I came in with a freshman class of 24 legislators 2 years ago. That's a third, it was a third of the Iowa House was brand new, and we come from such diverse backgrounds. So they developed these so that these new legislators could, they give it to them and say, here, you need to cram some information into your head here so you know how these things work. But they're available to you. And education, we need to get this into the hands of people so that you guys can all understand and ask the right questions, and then we all can come up with these solutions, because it gets complicated really quickly. All right, thank you.
Let me ask you,
Oh, sure.
Mayor, if I can, would you like to see changes in the TIF and how the structure of it is, or are you happy with how it's set up right now? Or
It's working for us right now, the way it is.
I think what that article was talking about was do we need to, and I like the mechanism, and I like the counties and the cities that have the ability to choose to use it in the way that they feel it's a fit for them, right? Because again, Jefferson County is different than Altoona with their data centers. I think the question is it being used in the right manner? Is it fair to provide all those massive millions and millions and millions of dollars of tax incentives for projects like these data centers that may or may not be job creators, or may be adding to the bottom line? I think that's what the question is. But as far as getting rid of TIF, I doubt it, and I like the flexibility so you can decide to use it as you see it's appropriate.
Yeah, my name is John Morrissey. I'm the city attorney here in Fairfield, and I'd like to couple on to the mayor's question to you about that. That article in the Des Moines Register had some conclusions, I would say, different than your panel's. Basically, they felt that the Facebook TIF up there for close to $1 billion worth of improvements and 11 buildings that will be on the tax rolls in 10 more years up there, fully taxed, was that it did create jobs. The campus for Facebook did get built. And what's going on now, halfway through that TIF, which was one of the big data TIFs, as you describe it, is that it's now being looked at, and part of the article was the mayor is intimidated, in my opinion, at Altoona that the legislature's only going to let the town when the full increased tax base becomes available and is taxed and helps that town with its revenue flow, is that that's going to be restricted by what you've done with 718, and it's going to be restricted by other limitations that you're looking at as far as the TIF program. Now, that was the gist of what I think the Des Moines Register was saying. And that would kill a lot of TIF incentives. Our town's been successful here with 10 TIFs since the 90s. We've never had one go haywire. We've had a lot of tax base added as a result of the TIFs, mostly housing and industrial. But that's one of the ways that you keep the valuation growing so that you don't have to make your millage grow as much. This town doesn't ever feel it has bloat or anything like that that would necessitate the 718 file that you adopted a couple years ago. And if you're being told that communities are getting along fine with that, you should talk to the public finance people at places like Piper Jaffray and some of the institutions that regularly go out and issue bonds, or talk to some of the bonding lawyers up in Des Moines, have them come and speak to the circumstances about the 718 effect so far. This town has had in the last 10 years, something very nice happened to it. It got re-rated by Moody's bonding company and the other bonding companies that look at communities and how they should be able to sell their public finance instruments. That helped us refinance several of the town's long-term investments in infrastructure, water, sewer, et cetera, and saved this town almost $1 million in interest just by being re-rated by Moody's. And that was because we sold off a public housing project to private ownership, and it replenished our cash position to the point where we looked relatively solvent. I have to tell you, this town has already spent half of that reserve in 2 years, putting it back in to the regular budget to make up for things that 718 cut us out on. We've had to cut services because of 718, but we've also had to put over $500,000 of our surplus from selling off our public housing. The first year, last year, I believe it was $450,000 that went back out. Within 2 years, we aren't going to have any capital liquidity that helped us get that changed Moody's bond rating. That's what's happened with 718 in this community. I've been doing city attorney work for 40 years. I've got a half a dozen other small towns that I sometimes do that. I saw one of our small town clerks quit because she just decided it's a good time not to be the clerk anymore because 718 frightened her off. And the small towns are feeling this also. They can't do the services anymore with what 718 leaves them. If you look around this town and you equate tax cuts as a good thing, all taxpayers would just as soon not pay more tax. I think Ben Franklin said it first, but basically taxation is a price we pay for living in the society we want to live in. And most of the people in this community over the years, I believe, have been happy with our amenities and our services. If you go and you ask the police department, though, how they're doing, they're going to say they're undermanned by undermanned or womaned by 4 or 5 people all the time. And the fire department could use more. The EMS could use more. Each of our service entities that have something to do with the emergency side are running close, if not understaffed, and those are serious things for us. So I don't know if anybody is out in the woods. I'm going to call us 90 cities that are county seat towns that aren't metros, the woods, but I don't know if there's really anybody. You guys hear about it in the legislature in Des Moines, and I commend you for having big ears and listening to all this stuff. But I also don't know if there's any kind of legislative study committee out there looking at this as far as the long-term impact. But it should be looked at both from the standpoint of how is it affecting community financial stability? Are the communities, by being forced to spend down their reserves, which usually there's pretty legitimate reasons for having several reserves. The state auditor forms that every clerk in the state uses has both a front page with a regular budget that people come to the budget hearing on, and it has a back page which is usually a set of different kinds of reserves that towns build up for everything from cemeteries to other projects that the town has that it amortizes and grows money for. But those kinds of things, I don't think they've been adequately considered as far as the impact of House File 718. So I don't know if there is a study group like that right now concerning 718, but that article about TIF at Altoona, it's premature. Altoona's still got 9 more years on that TIF before it gets a tax-based growth. But they're worried about it right now that they will not have the benefits they thought they'd get from increased valuation on that Facebook campus. I don't read in that article that Facebook campus is a failure or that it's not going to be there with valuation.
John, I'm sorry, but you've gone on 10 minutes now, and there's other people who ask questions. So do you have a question? I appreciate your point. We understand what you're saying.
I want to know what the legislature's doing to look at the impact of 718. It's going to wipe out our town's surplus and probably get us re-rated down in the next 2 years. Is there somebody looking at that impact?
So the issue on the TIF thing, the article we're talking about, 718 was passed 2 years ago, and this is the first thing that got brought up was this article in the Des Moines Register. ISAC hasn't brought that issue up. I mean, Altoona hasn't brought that up. I'm not saying it's not an issue, but once again, go back to when we introduced 718 2.5 years ago, and there was no conversation. No one said about those kind of issues. They just said, leave it be. We don't want to change property taxes. We were pretty adamant. We're going to change property taxes. Why? Because everybody here, 90% of you reach out and say, our property taxes are too high. So I'm going to listen to the people that reach out to me and say, our property taxes are too high. Now, if a different taxing entity think they're not, then Fairfield, Jefferson County, Henry County, whoever it is, needs to go sell it to their people as to why your property taxes aren't too high. That's not my job. My job is not to go and tell your citizens why your property taxes aren't too high. My job is to listen. And when 90% or more of them are saying they're too high, I'm going to listen. If you feel like your property taxes and whatever, I'm not picking on Fairfield or Jefferson County or any other entity. If you don't think they're too high, then you need to tell your people that, because that's not what we're hearing. That is not what we're hearing. The TIF issues, I understand the issues where you're talking about the TIF and how the Altoona issue where they deferred the taxes and they feel like they may not reap those benefits. And I agree, that's probably not fair to them. I hope we can address that in our new tax bill, but they've also had 2 years to bring that issue up and never heard about it. And that's not very responsible for the city of Altoona to not bring those issues up. When we sat there in meeting after meeting after meeting on 718 and that issue never got brought up, and there's a lot of cities, around Altoona, Council Bluffs, West Des Moines, a lot of them had that I would have expected them to have that issue. Hearing about it now, they didn't bring it up, okay? They just want to say, don't touch it. Well, everybody out here is telling us they want property tax relief. So,
towns this size, a 10,000 person town, still has a lot of benefit from TIF. We've been successful in ours. We've got a couple more on the table in the next year or two unless something gets taken away. So I guess our message and what we're hoping you're looking at, look at that article in the paper again. There's a lot more to it than I understand you interpret. I also understand the TIF concerns. There have been some abuses, not here. And we've got a housing project, an industrial project. We'd like to see the TIF, as it's worked successfully in the last 30 years, stay similar. So I think I'm speaking for the mayor, the town council, and we do have broadcast council meetings that we believe the citizens in town watch on our YouTube every time we have a meeting. It's not that the town isn't informed.
And I like the TIF mechanism. I don't want to come across that I don't. I do like the TIF mechanism, and I like the taxing entity that had the flexibility to decide how they want to use it. Again, what works for Fairfield or Jefferson County is not the same that may or may not work for Altoona. There's so many other sides to the issue that article did not address. For example, energy demand. Okay, these data centers, when we were picking out one example, but that's what the article was about, was these data centers and the amount of TIF that they have to encourage their build. But the amount of the power that they consume, and that affects everybody else in that city and Mid-America, whoever serves that area, is the amount of power that data center requires. I was at a meeting, I think Jeff was there, a few weeks ago at Access Energy. It was before session. We was just talking about issues, and that got brought up was like a data center, and they said we couldn't support one probably with what we have for a generation right now. You know how these data centers, and I got thinking about, okay, what about Altoona? What about West Des Moines? They have so many of them. How has that affected other businesses or other residential consumers and their energy rates in that area? Because that data center is pulling so much power off of what their generation capacity it is. So there's always a lot more avenues to it than just one thing. And that Des Moines Register article did paint it in just one lens.
So thank you, Council, for your guidance. I think we have been getting a lot of feedback over the last couple of years. I've been very involved in Mount Pleasant and Van Buren County. Jefferson County haven't been as involved in, but yeah, we've been hearing a lot of feedback on this over the last couple of years, and we will continue to do so. So I mean, we're certainly open and interested. I think the only service that you guys had cut that I had heard a lot of complaints about was the compost pile. I don't know what the whole situation there, but yeah, I think, you know, if the feedback gets to us as well. So if there are things that are affecting people, you know, we will hear about it. But again, I would just encourage you to make sure that you are properly maintaining the city finances and that, you know, I don't want to get too far over my skis, but someone told me one time you guys were paying for the cemetery on the north side of town when you ought not to have been. So, you know, there could be other things like that where you need to take a closer look in making sure that, and again, the power to tax, and again, I think the quote is actually attributed to Oliver Wendell Holmes on the power that tax is the price we pay for civilized society, but also taxation is the power to destroy. And, you know, make no mistake, when you're, as Helena alluded to before, if someone has to pay a tax every single year on their property, do they really own that property? And you're essentially forcing money out of people's pockets, and you'll condemn their property if they don't. So that's a very, very, very powerful force that's been entrusted to you. And I think we just need to make sure that, I think the common goal we can all share is that when we're using this power to tax, that the money is being, you know, really well stewarded and is going to services that the people expect and want, and you know, the things that are really essential. And so I think we are at a time, I don't want to make any economic forecast or anything, but I think we are at a time where we need to take a real clear look at our budgets, whether it's our family budget, the state budget, or our local municipalities. We need to make sure that every single dollar that we're getting good value from it. And I think the general consensus we've been hearing is that a lot of people don't think that's taking place. So like I said, we're open, we appreciate the feedback, and this will be a conversation that will probably go on through the end of session, through the end of April, and probably for many years to come.
I'm Rich Sims. Once again, we're going to have a CAFO moratorium on new and expanding animal confinements. And that bill was introduced to the House by Representative Eleanor Levin, and we may have one introduced in the Senate as well. And this will be the 8th consecutive year that a moratorium bill has been introduced, but it never gets a subcommittee assignment or a public hearing. And 63% of Iowans do support a CAFO moratorium on new and expanding CAFOs. And it's likely that there's a greater percentage around your constituents. So with that sustained support for reintroducing the bill year after year, Iowans are not letting up on the support. And this should all tell you how important this is to the people in your that you represent. The question is, once these bills are introduced, will you reach out to the chairs of whatever committee they are assigned and lend your support to get the bills assigned to a subcommittee with a scheduled public hearing? With the water pollution crisis in our state, this bill really does deserve a hearing. Your thoughts?
I mean, I'll just throw this out there. Again, I appreciate the question. I certainly appreciate where you're coming from. I think we all need to work together to be good stewards of the environment. The agricultural economy is not great right now. I think there was a major pork producer in Washington County that declared bankruptcy. I'm not aware of any new construction taking place. So I think the economic picture has shifted significantly from, say, maybe 10 or 15 years ago, where these barns were a bit more profitable. So as far as that particular bill, it seems like it's a solution in search of a problem. And again, I'm in favor of all legislation getting hearings, but you know, it is a lot of time constraints, and it is asking a lot for legislators to do that, especially if there's not a lot of support. So I will know that's legislation I've tracked every year I've been in office. The support is dwindling. I think a lot of legislators who did sign on to that, I guess put it this way, I think you'll get fewer co-sponsors this year than in previous years. Some of the legislators who really advanced that proposal are no longer there. I'm thinking like Chuck Eisenhart in Dubuque. He lost his election, and that was one of the things he really cared about. So, you know, when people, so that's just kind of how the process works. So no, I don't think this is a good time to be kind of kicking down on ag. I think the market and just the commodity and the credit crunch, I think is going to take care of that. There's just not a lot of capital to invest in these things at this point in time. So I think that's the best answer I can give you on that one.
Is that voice coming from the public's voice, the support for this bill? Legislators that whatever they think, or they're kowtowing to big ag or whatever, to the big corporations that are involved in these, or what?
Are you aware of any new construction in this area?
Yes.
Is there an active permit being applied for, or what's happening?
There's been 65 CAFOs that were applied for and built in 2024 in field office number 6. So maybe not Jefferson County, but all the other counties combined in field office number 6. There were 65 this past year.
Well, we've been hearing kind of the other way, that again, just the profitability of the operation is not what it was, and that I think there's, again, just I'm happy to review that, but it's not something we've been hearing as a real urgent priority from what's actually happening on the ground. But I mean, if there is new construction occurring, then I think, you know, we got to make sure we're conforming with the master matrix, and then we have a manure management plan, et cetera. I know there are some waterways that have been deemed by the EPA as being a problem. And so if there is applicable federal law that we need to enforce, or the federal government needs to enforce, then obviously that needs to happen. But it's difficult to see that idea gaining traction in this legislature. And I'm coming from, I think I'm the only person ever in this area who's signed on to that proposal. So just to be clear on where I'm coming from.
I don't serve, I would assume those two bills probably either went through DNR or ag. In the Senate, I'm not on either of those committees. That's what I was talking about a little bit earlier when we say what committees we're on. You know, any legislation like that, I just don't even see it until it comes out of the committee. And every committee chair runs their committees differently. Some committee chairs think every single bill that gets introduced should be assigned a sub. Doesn't mean it's going to get a sub, but some think they should have a sub. Subcommittee chairs think, you know, it takes a lot of time to have subs, and if there's no chance that that bill is going to get votes to pass out of committee or even out of a sub, then I'm wasting a lot of people's time, the public's, the lobby, legislators' time to have a committee on, to have a sub on a bill that may not see the time of day. I'm not saying I have a position one way or the other, but different committee chairs look at that differently. And that may be why it has not had a sub-hearing in the past.
And I just want to mention, so I've served on natural resources with Representative Levin, and yeah, that wasn't brought up, but I do want to just emphasize that, you know, we're all Republicans here. We're registered Republicans. I'm not afraid to sign onto a bill with the Democrat. It's not them versus us. I don't want it to ever be a party thing. I did actually do that very thing on a Democrat bill proposal regarding research for further underground water cavities and things like that, and did lobby my leadership to bring that bill into a subcommittee, and I was not successful. I have had plenty of bills that have not also got subcommittees. Some states do that. They have every single bill gets a subcommittee. Now, I want to make a distinction here. These subcommittees, you guys have three, there's 2 Republicans and 1 Democrat on each subcommittee, and that's the only time that you get to physically come and have public input during the meeting process. When they're in committee, you can be there, but the committee is just having that conversation internally, you know, amongst themselves. And it's all public, of course. But the subcommittee process is very, very important. And you're asking that that the public input be allowed for that. And that certainly is no harm to it. But there is also, you know, we're in session for 110 days, and we have, I don't know, I think we had 2,000 bills last year. And so it is a real, sometimes it's just the practicality of everything. But you know what? I'll see Representative Levin Tuesday, and I'll put that on my my to-do list, okay? I will talk to her and I'll see what it says, because again, I haven't seen the bill. It has not ever been assigned, and I don't know really, this is the thing, you guys, when we all have ideas, but how do those ideas translate into specific bill language? The bills that we're gonna read and attempt to pass that then become statutory law that you then have to follow. So this transfer of ideas into bill language and then the law is it's a very precarious process because every single word matters. And so it's always hard. We can commit to ideas and viewpoints and how we see the world, you know, the lens by which we see the world. But we have to be very careful when we take a bill and ask, what is this doing and what is it not doing? Because so many times we have people upset because they think the bill is doing something it's not. And so, again, I'd have to read it. I want to know what it says. I want to understand it. I'll talk to Representative Levin. She's also on education too. So.
And I think just feedback I've gotten over the years, especially when we're talking about a big topic that, you know, essentially would kneecap an entire industry. If the goal is to get a subcommittee hearing, you kind of need to cut off a much smaller piece that's more easily digestible. So if you wanted to come up with a proposal to say increase setbacks or adjust the scoring on the master matrix, or you know, higher fees for permitting, or greater enforcement for when there is a ecological problem. I think that's a real problem I have heard in Henry County, that, oh, they spilled their hog manure all over my field and the DNR is not doing enough to enforce what they ought to be doing. So, you know, if you find a smaller angle that's a little bit more easy to digest, that would be my recommendation to anyone who's trying to actually get a hearing scheduled.
Another thing that, and it's very hard for anybody else to see that, we see it, we know it. There's one thing about introducing legislation. And there's legislators that introduce legislation just to introduce legislation. I'm one of them. No, I wouldn't say you're one of those. But there's some, I mean, I won't call names. I'm thinking, excuse me, on the Senate side, that you go by that legislator's desk and they got that many bill proposals set on their desk, okay? They're just throwing paper to throw paper. And I don't know that they're really serious about any of it. accomplishing anything other than they say, well, I introduced this bill to do this, okay? Then there's some people that have no bills or fewer bills, or may have a lot of bills, but work the bill. Like, it's one thing to introduce a piece of legislation, as you talked about this morning, and that's fine. I'm not complaining at all. But it's another for a legislator to go work that piece of legislation. Go to Jeff, go to Helena, come to my desk, say, this is why this is important. Let me sit down and talk with you about it. And so many of these bills that I see as headlines, I never even heard about it, right? I hear about it here. And I shouldn't hear about something from that representative. I should not hear about this bill from you. I should have heard about it from her if it's something that she really wanted to push. Now I'm in the Senate, so I'm not going to hear from her. But I think you understand what I'm getting at, right? It's the same way in the Senate. There's legislation that gets introduced that's just done maybe because it's a piece of paper, it makes somebody happy that it looks like they did something about it. But there's something to be said about really being behind it and pushing and trying to get people to understand why this is important. And too often, that's why we often have 2,000 bills at any given time. That's not what takes place, and the system kind of weeds that stuff out.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Jeff, to speak to your point about a smaller section of the bill, there is going to be a bill introduced in the House by Senator Art Stade that's looking at water quality and monitoring for spills. So keep an eye out on that, okay? But I'm here to talk about Senate File 2412, the Pesticide Immunity Bill, and that is going to be debated again this year. It passed in the Senate last year, but it didn't pass in the House. Senate File 2412 would grant chemical companies immunity from lawsuits concerning injuries that occur from pesticide usage if the pesticide is EPA approved and it contains a warning label. Now, the problem is that public health experts say many of the warning labels are insufficient, or the chemical companies sometimes may not be forthcoming with all known risk, which has happened. Additionally, labels may be written even for some health hazards that take a period of time to manifest are known. The EPA also tests active ingredients, but not all parts of the formulation, which may be equally or more dangerous. So proponents of the bill say there's no proof that glyphosate or other chemical agents are harmful, but apparently there's enough documented harms and a lot of studies, so much so that Bayer has lost numerous lawsuits surrounding glyphosate to the tune of billions of dollars. And they're heading up a coalition of organizations lobbying hard for Senate File 2412. Now, Iowa has the second highest cancer rate in the country, and it's the only state where the incidence of cancer is growing. So I wanted to ask if you would be willing to put the well-being of those suffering from cancer and other pesticide injuries, many of whom are farmers, before the profits of the multinational chemical companies, and would you oppose Senate File 2412?
I'll answer that. That's a political statement you made, not an actual description of the bill and the issue at hand. The issue at hand on this is very different than what you described, okay? That bill last year that you're referring to, and you said it's going to be introduced this year, I don't know that it is. You have a crystal ball I don't have, I guess, because I have not seen that. Here's what happened on that bill last year. The federal government says the federal government controls what labels you put on your product. That's why, let's go back to McDonald's when they have a cup of coffee that says caution, hot, right? Because they got sued over somebody spilling coffee on their lap. So now they got to put a label on it, okay? Federal government stepped in and says, we're controlling what labeling we're putting on these products. We're talking about the Roundup type products, okay? They control what label, federal government controls what labels that can be put on that product. Why wouldn't Bayer or any of these chemical companies want to put the nastiest, craziest warnings on there to protect themselves? Caution causes cancer, caution causes death, caution, whatever. If that's all they need to do to protect themselves. Because more than likely the farmer who is going to buy the product is still going to buy the product regardless of what label's on it. They're still going to buy the product. So to stop over-labeling So the attorneys have all 37,000 pages of stuff that they want to have covered on a label to protect their back ends to prevent that, which then no one pays attention to labels because there's so damn many of them. The federal government says, you can put labeling on there, we say you can put on there. Federal government claims that that has not been proven to cause cancer. Different issue. And that's largely what you were speaking about. Federal government does not make that connection. Disagree with it? Different issue. That's not what this bill's about. What that bill was about was simply saying, if the federal government says I cannot put that label on my product, you cannot sue me for not having that label on my product. So here was the avenue where they were getting sued. The World Health Organization, who all told us all these wonderful things about COVID because they were absolutely honest on it, has four different testing agencies in the world that do different testing on different things. Two of them have not said that this causes cancer. Two have. One of those two also says that coffee causes cancer. I'm not a big coffee drinker, but to me right away that diminishes their credibility, okay? But because they said somewhere over in Europe said that that product causes cancer, and because we say it causes cancer, now we're gonna have open the door to some liberal courts in the United States so you get sued because you don't have that label on your product that says it can't causes cancer when you can't have it because the United States government says you can't put the label on the product. That's what that bill was about. It wasn't about whether it causes cancer or not. It simply says that you cannot be sued for doing something that our federal government tells you you cannot do. And that issue is tort reform. It's not about cancer. It's not about giving protection to big corporations. It's tort reform. The lawsuits we have in this country are stupid. And this is one step to stopping some stupid lawsuits. If you want to change it, if the government thinks it causes cancer, that's a different issue. But that bill is not about what you're talking about.
Okay, I'd like to go next. This is the beautiful part about these dialogues, you guys. We can disagree in a very civil way. And I fully disagree with my senator here. I do. I have to make this confession. I absolutely will not support this bill. And here's why. Let me tell you my why. I have everything I can understand about this because I've done my research. I've really tried hard to understand this. This gets complicated very quickly, folks. This is talking about how and why you can bring, a civil action against a company. And the best that I can understand from the lawyers I've spoken with, when you bring a lawsuit against somebody, you have to have a cause of action, right? You have to have a mechanism to do so. From what I understand, the language last time anyway, I have heard it would be going into the Senate. I have not heard that from the Senate itself, but I have also heard that this would definitely be coming up. That basically the language meant that you could not use, the label was sufficient to warn, and it could not be used for the cause of action. So what's happening then is that you remove one of the avenues by which you can bring your voice forward so that a jury can hear you out. That Seventh Amendment we have, the right to a jury. You remove that from people. And to be quite frank, I have not voted for any of the tort bills we've had. This is the third tort bill that we've seen. We did medical malpractice, we did trucker tort reform, and now this one. And I really struggle with this issue. This is a complicated issue. It gets messy. But I did take an oath to the Constitution to protect your constitutional rights. And your constitutional rights always have a jury. Now, some people will say, well, your right to a jury didn't get taken away. But what did get taken away is the mechanism by which you could bring that for that particular reason. So, yeah, this is a sticky issue. But I absolutely have not supported this bill.
So thank you, Diana. important issues that are affecting the people of Iowa. And I think you're correct that I want to hear from Farm Bureau membership because they're theoretically the people who are most exposed to these chemicals. And we brought it up at our meeting in December and had some really good discussion. So there's a lot to it. I will just say I think I am sympathetic and do lean. Historically, the House has been a lot more reluctant on some of these tort reform proposals. And as you noticed, the proposal did pass the Senate. It did not even make it through the committee in the House. But I think there are going to be some additional discussions on that. I know the proponents, they're viewing it as kind of like almost a national security issue. They're viewing that, okay, these chemicals are so important to industrial agriculture that we need to make sure they're manufactured here in America or in Muscatine. And so that's a very interesting argument. But again, I think there is an underlying theory of liability. I know Bayer, I think they've had maybe 40,000 lawsuits is the number I heard, and I'm sure many of them are probably frivolous, but probably not all of them are. So therefore, we need to make sure especially if a company is knowingly, right? That's always the big key is like, what did you know and when did you know it? If a company is knowingly aware that their product is likely to cause harm and they fail to disclose that, I think that is a very important actionable tort that should be litigated and they should be held accountable and held liable for that. So I think this is a very important discussion. I'm also very interested in a lot of other, theories of liability that could emerge here. I'm very interested in the contamination of the food supply. So one thing I was looking up was chlorumquat, which I guess is a chemical used very much in oat production, so non-Iowa. But could be causing fertility issues. And obviously we have no shortage of fertility issues as we're seeing people. So again, I respect where the Senate's coming from, and I respect the farmers in the state. And that's kind of the group I'm looking forward to is, those who are most exposed to these chemicals. I know the first big case, the guy was a landscaper and he had glyphosate was leaking down on his skin directly for many years at a time. Most people are not going to have that level of exposure. So again, I think we just need to make sure we're keeping, a broad picture and keeping everything in perspective. While, this could be a carcinogen, there's lots of other things that are very harmful in the environment that we need to not lose sight of. So I want like a full spectrum discussion. And I think the governor was very careful in her cancer proposal and the way, the rhetoric she used. She acknowledged that, there likely are multiple causes that need to be explored there. But just one thing that's very puzzling to me, so there are other industries in the United States that enjoy this robust legal immunity. One very important piece of federal legislation is the National Childhood Vaccine Injury Act, which holds vaccine manufacturers harmless from any damages their product can cause as long as it's listed in that vaccine insert. So that, again, prompts a lot of other questions. Are patients aware of this vaccine insert prior to the administration of the vaccine? So there's a lot of really complex legal questions that go into this, and I just kind of want consistency, right? So, I'm willing to oppose this bill, but I guess what I would ask from the other members of the public is, well, can we also talk about these other industries that may be enjoying similar legal protections? And again, just as a legal framework with all these corporate products, making sure that the people can hold these corporate actors accountable if their product is found to be causing injury or harm or whatever that may be. So keep an eye on this discussion. I think they have legislation in several other states. Last thing I'll say, of all the lawsuits against Bayer, I'm not aware of any, again, I don't know everything, but I think most of them are in other states. So that's kind of one of the puzzle pieces I'm trying to figure out is it seems like the litigation is happening in other states. So how does the corporation benefit really if Iowa does this? I'm not totally sure, but I have a lot to learn on this issue. But like I said, the House killed the bill last year, and we'll see what happens this year.
Can I say one more thing too? You didn't share this fact. Iowa is the second highest cancer rate, but you didn't share the fact that when they ranked these states, Jefferson County, your county, you guys, ranks lower than the lowest state. And I tell as many people that as I can. Why does Jefferson County rank lower than the lowest state in cancer rates? And I just leave people with that. I think it's a beautiful thing. You're doing something right. Something good is happening in Jefferson County. And it pertains to people's health and their longevity. And so, don't forget to share that.
So just to clarify though, if that bill had passed last year and became law in Iowa, you could certainly still sue that manufacturer of that product. If you think it causes cancer, if you have a cause of action, you can still sue them. The only thing that bill prevents you from doing is suing them because of a label that they didn't have on their product that the federal government said they can't have on their product. That's all that that bill did last year. It did not give them immunity, just says you can't sue them for a label that our federal government says they can't put on there in the first place.
Hello, panel. Thank you for being here. My name is Dee Bosold. My question regards school vouchers, specifically for private schools. So when Rob Sand came, he expressed concerns about a lack of oversight for how private schools handle funds that they receive through this voucher program. And I want to know about what you can tell me about any oversight of private schools and how they handle these funds. If you think those concerns are unfounded, I want to know about that. But if you think that we don't need more oversight and that oversight needs to be minimal, please go on record about that. Thank you.
So right now, non-public accredited institutions are the ones that would qualify for the ESA scholarship, or what you call the voucher. And so I actually am very interested in the same question in terms of, so right now the Department of Ed manages the accreditation, and they have several third-party accreditors they recognize, and they have their own accreditation process. I believe in Jefferson County, we have 2 accredited non-publics, the Maharishi School and then Singing Cedars, whose accreditation was in progress. I know there's a non-public school in Mount Pleasant. They've neglected to become accredited, so they're still operating just as they were before this program came online. But it's a great question. So again, I might get myself in trouble here, but so for Maharishi School, I believe their accreditation dates back to 1986. And so I think there is a role for the State Department to say, okay, well, are you still accredited, or how long is this accreditation good for? Or certainly there's a lot of other laws we've passed pertaining to obscene materials and minors and things like that. So, how far can a non-public school go on some of these issues where the Department of Education would still acknowledge their accreditation? So, I mean, if you're advocating to say, okay, Maharishi School, you haven't been accredited since 1986, maybe you should not qualify for the voucher, I'd be comfortable with that. By the third-party accreditor? I didn't see you, Dr. Bell. Sorry. If I knew you were there, I probably would choose my words more carefully. So.
Yeah, so ESAs, educational savings accounts. I'm a homeschool mom. I did things out of the box. I didn't follow the routine. Neither does Jefferson County down here. You guys do not follow the status quo when it comes to how you learn, lifelong learning, how you do things. It's very unique. And there's nothing wrong with that. It's actually quite invigorating and refreshing. I absolutely support the ESAs, and I think your question, who did you say did not provide or said that there's no lack of oversight? You said a name?
The concern that I heard as far as lack of oversight for recipients of voucher funding are qualified to use the...
I thought you said somebody brought it up.
Specifically the state auditor,
The auditor, okay. Yeah. If you look at the numbers and how much is going to ESAs compared to public schools. Remember, ESAs are the non-public, what most of us would just call private schools. They're not necessarily all Christian or Catholic schools, okay? They're just not public schools, and they're not charter schools. A charter school is considered a public school. So you look at the numbers, it's very, very small, okay? Like, I'd love to show you the little graph. It hardly even has any color on that pie chart. I fully support all the different opportunities that are available in education. Do I believe there's a lack of oversight in it? This money's already going to accredited institutions just that follow the same accreditation as public schools. They're doing the same requirements. And so, yeah, I think it's a great opportunity. I think we should continue to pursue what is unique and works for each child and each family. It's not always going to be the same.
Well, just to throw a couple other thoughts out there. So the program's been very popular, right? It's almost been a victim of its own success. It's now being criticized that, oh, too many people are taking advantage of this, and that's why it's bad, and it's going to be problematic with the budget, even though that doesn't actually add up, because every student that takes advantage of this, theoretically, it saves money. But I know there's just a lot of parents are wanting options, right? And so I would encourage the public, if the public schools or a charter school, if they wanted to explore a Montessori method, or I think the biggest thing I've been hearing the last couple weeks from parents is they want an environment free of technology. So right now, the public school, for the last decade or so, they've had a one-to-one device policy where, starting in kindergarten, every kid has their own iPad. And a lot of parents are not wanting that. So, do the public schools need to pioneer another option, or maybe if a school district wants to designate one building for a particular, Montessori method, or a device-free or technology-free or Wi-Fi-free, so I think I would encourage the public school too to keep experimenting and really getting that input from parents as well, and finding what is it that parents want to attract them to their schools. There's nothing that I am aware of that would prevent a public school from exploring that. And if there is, I think the legislature would need to create that flexibility that the school districts, that they're empowered to provide what the parents in their community want, and provide several options, depending on the size of the community. Some districts may be able to do that. So I think this is still an issue that's being debated across the country. I know Tennessee and Texas, and Texas, I think that's the second largest state in the United States. So, some very active discussions still on just where this policy is going to be and where things will be, and just how rapidly the education space is changing too. So one thing I've been trying to wrap my mind around is these AI tools, these large language models, and how in some ways they make large aspects of education obsolete. If you can ask the computer to write your essay for you and it produces better content in a tiny fraction of the time, why wouldn't a student take advantage of that? Obviously, the big concern is the over-reliance on technology is diminishing our cognitive capacity. A lot of people can't multiply anymore because they've had a calculator their whole life. Some people can't even navigate without their phone telling them where to go. So these are very important questions that the education space needs to be aware of and needs to be more forward-thinking on. I've actually been surprised. I talked to a university president, who they did not have a unified policy on AI, and kind of every instructor was doing it differently. And I don't think they were quite up to speed on just how disruptive this technology really is, especially in the education realm. And on that note, I know the Department of Ed invested in an AI literacy tool, which I still have to get a demonstration of it, but we've heard really positive feedback on that. And so I think we could quickly be entering in a world where Microsoft or Amazon or Meta comes out with an AI product that could perhaps, provide a tailored curriculum particular to that child. How would that interface with the public or non-public systems? So there are a lot of really, really important questions that both the public and the legislature, and certainly any educator, needs to really be considering on just where these things are going. But I think in the short term, the Education Savings Account program has been a tremendous success because it did provide that kind of safety release valve for people who are really in a tough situation in the public schools. So appreciate the question, and certainly I think it is incumbent on the legislature to provide oversight that if these institutions are getting taxpayer dollars, we do need at least some modicum of responsibility for what these institutions are doing.
For joining us this morning for today's candidate forum. Special thank you to the legislators for making their time here. They already spend their entire week away from their family, so we took a couple more hours. We would like to say thank you to our sponsors for making this free and open to the public, and Jason, of course, for streaming. We have some events on the doors for you to look at. We have a Donuts with the Directors event coming up. If you're thinking about being a chamber member, or if you are a chamber member, you can come in and find out if you're using all of your benefits and get some tutorials on some of the other benefits that we'll be rolling out. We would also invite you to join us on January 29th at the Public Library from 6:30 to 8. We will be having an incentives presentation from the Iowa Downtown Resource Center as well as Iowa Finance Authority. This is specific to business and building owners and the city itself. So these are, find out about those funding sources that are available to you that we maybe don't know about, and they're going to present about those. So that's a really great opportunity. If you are not getting chamber chatter and you feel like you're missing events, that's probably why. So go to fairfieldiowa.com, scroll down about halfway, and click subscribe to our e-newsletter. Our next legislative forum is on March 15th. I will again ask that you please do not bring paper with long things to read, that you just ask your question in a positive or neutral manner, and that you just ask your one question. We could have gotten a lot more questions in today if we could have stayed with those requirements. Also, please make sure that you are out of the building in 30 minutes so that Seth can go on about his day. And thank you for being an informed citizen, making this time to discuss and engage in a positive way. And we will see you on the 15th. Have a great day.
Thank you.